God's name can be seen in Psalms 83:18. Hello, I'm Ray Morris. This is another video of New World Translation Curiosities. And in this video, which is number 8, we're going to be speaking about God's name in the Old Testament. In video number 9, we speak about God's name in the New Testament. There's just a lot to say to squeeze it all in one video. So we're going to be featuring that today. New World Translation Curiosities is a video where we compare the New World Translation with a King James Version and other versions of the Bible too. And we also compare other sources such as lexicons, Bible commentaries, and things like that to help back up what is said. So, since we're talking about God's name and that it is seen in the King James Version at Psalm 83:18, let's look that up and give it a read. There it says, "That men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the Most High over all the earth." It's not uncommon to come across people that don't realize that God's name is in the King James Version of the Bible, and as a matter of fact, not just that his name is there the few times that it is, but that it's there thousands of times in the form of Lord in all capital letters. Being born and raised a Lutheran, one of the things that we were to memorize was the 23rd Psalm, where it starts out, "The Lord is my shepherd." Yet, if we read it in the Bible, we will notice that there's a little bit more to just saying the Lord. But Lord is in capital letters too. As we can see, it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But the word Lord is in capital letters, showing that it was originally God's name in Hebrew. It's known as Yahweh, or it could be Jehovah, as is popular. But many translations will change it to Lord in all capital letters, and we'll be discussing that. Another place where we see it is actually in the Ten Commandments. Let's notice that in Exodus 20, verse 7. There we read, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." And again, we can see Lord is in all capital letters twice in there. And this commandment has a little bit of a stipulation after it too. "For the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." So that shows that God places some value on his personal name, whether it be Yahweh or Jehovah. Well, why is it that so many translations remove the name of God, and what is their reasoning for it? We have somebody who sent in a question, and there was a response from one of the translators on this. So let me read this to you, and you can follow along here. This is questioning why they didn't use Jehovah in the New International Version of the Bible. The response: "Here is why we did not. You are right that Jehovah is a distinctive name for God, and ideally we should have used it. But we put $2.25 million into this translation, and a sure way of throwing that down the drain is to translate, for example, Psalm 23 as Yahweh is my shepherd." Well, this shows that that's the way it originally was. Immediately, we would have translated for nothing. Nobody would have used it. Oh, maybe you and a handful of others, but a Christian has to also be wise and practical. We are the victims of 350 years of the King James tradition. It is far better to get 2 million to read it, and that is how many have bought it to date. This is back in the 1970s. And to follow the King James than to have 2,000 buy it and to have the correct translation of Yahweh. It was a hard decision, and many of our translators agree with you. So we can see here that there is a committee that explained their reason why they don't want to use Jehovah in the translation that they translated. And it brings us to question, is that really legitimate? These are the first reasons that translators use for not putting the name of God in their translations: money and King James tradition. Well, the New International Version Committee thought that they were only going to sell a few copies of their translation if they used the name Yahweh or Jehovah. But is that really true? The New World Translation uses Jehovah. They're not afraid to put it in there, and at this time they have 240 million copies of the New World Translation. So it has gotten out. Can we say that because not too many people are going to buy it is a good reason to wipe God's name out of the Bible? Not at all. And as a matter of making money, is that what we're in the Bible for? Is that what these translators are doing? They just want to make some money? Well, they may need a little bit to help spread the word of God, but that shouldn't even be brought up, really. And curious, they want to follow the King James tradition. But if we remember in our earlier videos, the New International Version didn't have a problem of taking out 1 John 5:7. That's part of the King James tradition. They didn't have a problem removing the word begotten out of John 3:16, which is obviously King James tradition at least, and even changing the word that Jesus is the beginning of creation into Jesus is the ruler of creation in Revelation 3:14. And there's a lot of other changes too that they broke as far as King James tradition. And as far as Bible translations like the New International Version wanting to follow the tradition of King James, they even took the name Jehovah out of Psalm 83:18, which we know and just have read is in there. They're not following King James tradition there. And there are other instances where King James also had the name Jehovah, and the New International Version removed those instances. We're not going to check them all, but here's one case. In Genesis 22 verse 14, we read, "And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day." The New International Version changes it. "So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide." So the New International Version even changed the name of a location in taking the name of Jehovah out of the Bible. So are they really concerned with following King James tradition? Well, if they were, they wouldn't have veered from it so much in the first place. So we can't really use that as an excuse. So is money and King James tradition a valid reason to take God's name out of the Bible? Is it okay to tamper and change what God wanted written there and replace it with something that suits our own personal preference? Well, we have to say no for this one. Now, there are those that will say we can't use Jehovah because it's not the correct pronunciation. The Revised Standard Version in their foreword has this to say: "The form Jehovah is of late medieval origin. It is a combination of the consonants of the divine name and the vowels attached to it by the Masoretes, but belonging to an entirely different word." Yes, they did use the vowels from the Hebrew word Adonai, which is Lord, and mix them with the Hebrew word Jehovah, and that's how they got Jehovah. But is that any of a good reason why we should not use Jehovah? So if we can't use the name Jehovah because of the wrong vowels, what about all the other theophoric names that are in the Bible? What's theophoric? Here we go. Jehoshaphat, Jehosheba, Jehoshabeath, Jehonadab, Jehoiakim, Jehoahaz, Jehoaz, Jehoiada, Jehoiada, Jehoram, Jehozabad, Jehozadak, Jehovah. Oops, we can't use that. But nobody ever gives thought about getting rid of those other names, which are exactly the same vowels. Does anybody ever think of saying Yehoshaphat or Lord Shaphat? Not at all. So if the name Jehovah isn't to be used, well, why is there a double standard that these other names are still kept in? Now, we are okay using Yahweh if that's the way to go. It certainly is a name, whereas Lord is a title, so that would be appropriate. But if we want to stick to that Hebrew pronunciation in the Bible there, wouldn't we be obliged to use Hebrew names throughout the whole Bible? For instance, here I have the Jewish New Testament, and in this particular version by David Stern, he uses the Hebrew names in the New Testament. Let's take note of how some of these sound. Just a little bit here from the book of Matthew, chapter 16, starting at verse 13. When Yeshua, the Hebrew name for Jesus, came into territory around Caesarea Philippi, he asked his Talmudim, disciples, "Who are people saying the Son of Man is?" They said, "Well, some say Yohanan the Immerser." Yohanan is John, and the Immerser would be the Baptist. Others, Eliyahu. Now this would be Elijah, but this is the Hebrew name, Eliyahu. Still others, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. "But you," he said to them, Jesus, "who do you say I am?" Shimon Kepha answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." So even Peter's name is different too. The point being, if we were to use Hebrew in one sense, wouldn't we be obliged to use Hebrew in another sense? Or if we have the Latinized words that are used in our English Bibles, wouldn't we just continue to do so even when it comes to the name Jehovah? Here are some other curious names that are said in Hebrew that we don't use in English. Taoma, Thomas. Yaakov for James. Yaakov ben Kalphai, James the son of Alphaeus. Well, there's an unusual pronunciation. Also in Hebrew, they say Yerushalayim for Jerusalem, Yeshua for Jesus, Judah for Judah, and Judah ben Yaakov, Judas the son of James. One thing curious too, where the Hebrew has the letter Y, it gets changed into our Latinized names with the letter J. Now that's a procedure that's done throughout the whole Bible, so why not stick to it and have Jehovah the same way with the letter J? Here's one last instance of translating names. We all know of this sign that was put above Jesus' head during his execution. Notice in the first line it's Hebrew characters. In this case, it's the word all the way to the right, since they read from right to left. We see the name Jesus, or Yeshua in Hebrew. The middle line, we see it in Greek, Jesus, and underneath we see it in Latin, which is a lot closer to Jesus as is spelled for us. So does anybody have an issue with the names being in different languages for this sign? I have never seen anybody making an issue of that there. So it's okay to change the names into different languages to suit the language of the translated Bible. Just look here how we see Jehovah translated into so many different languages. It's okay to do that, and other names are also translated according to Bible translations and the languages that they're translated into. So if using Jehovah is wrong and we should take that name out of the Bible and replace it with the title, shouldn't we do that with all the other words and all the other names that we have in our translations? Well, it isn't done otherwise, so really it shouldn't be done here too. And to take Jehovah out of the Bible because it has the vowels of Lord, and then insert another word that has the vowels of the word Lord, and it even has the consonants of the word Lord. Well, in doing that, how are we one step closer to the original languages? We really aren't. So keeping Jehovah or even Yahweh in the original languages certainly is the better option. So another reason why translators remove God's name from the written word is because of Jewish tradition. We will follow a Jewish tradition, superstition, and not say God's name at all. But how many people have ever really looked deeply into that Jewish tradition, and how was that Jewish tradition carried out? Well, now we're going to take a look at the very first translation of the Bible, of the Old Testament, that was ever done. We can see here some of the parchments, some of the pieces of the original Greek Septuagint, and these are pieces that have been dated to the time of Jesus or older. So yes, these are the original pages from the original first translation of the Bible. Notice those orange dots that are there? They're highlighting the name Jehovah in that translation. We can see that this is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and at those times the Jews did not remove the name of God from their written Bible. Here's another page dated about the same time. This was all around 150 BCE and surrounding years, the time of Jesus and older. And again, we see in these green circles, God's name was still there in the written text. And another parchment, this one's in Hebrew, but yet they still wrote God's name in the original ancient writing that we can see here. So it was left in. The Jews, the Hebrews, did not remove God's name from their earliest Bible translations. Sometimes instead of writing it in Hebrew, they did write it in Greek. There we see the Greek letters, but it is still God's name, and it's not Lord. They kept God's name in their original writings. A scholar named Larry Hurtado had his focus around the earliest years of the Christian congregation and earlier, and had a lot to say about these texts that we just saw. Let's give a listen.
The Jewish reverential practices that you talk about tend to involve substitution of the word, for example, the word Elohim for YHWH, or use of substituting dots, or, as you say, writing in a Hebrew copy where the divine name appears, that Hebrew copy in the kind of Hebrew that you see here that we know about, writing the name of God in Paleo-Hebrew characters, or in Greek manuscripts, interestingly, writing the name of God in Hebrew characters. So it'll be Greek, 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 and wherever Yahweh's name appears, it will be written. So it's substitutes, it's not abbreviations. The mechanics are different. Secondly, and very importantly, those substitutions were intended, it appears, to guide how you were to read the text aloud. So when you get to that tetragram, the fact that it was written in a different script was to signal to you, you don't pronounce it. You would use an oral substitute, which in Hebrew would probably be Adonai, and in Greek would be Kyrios, according to the earliest references that we have from Philo and Josephus and so on. So it was intended as a reader's aid to cue you that when you get to that point, you pronounce something different than you don't pronounce the divine name. It's okay to write it, but you shouldn't pronounce it.
It's okay to write it, but you shouldn't pronounce it. Yes, that is the case, that it was written but not pronounced. As a matter of fact, let me pull out a little something here from what other scholars have to say about this. Frank Kruzman says that all extant, unequivocally Jewish fragments of the Septuagint render God's name in Hebrew letters, or else with special signs of different kinds. Robert J. Wilkinson remarks that evidence from manuscripts of the Septuagint is inconclusive about what was in what the New Testament readers read. While no indisputably early Jewish Greek biblical manuscript currently known has contained Kyrios, no early indisputably Christian Greek biblical New Testament manuscript has been found with the Tetragrammaton written in Paleo-Hebrew or Aramaic script, or with Pi. There is no doubt about what they wrote. We may be uncertain what the New Testament writers read in Scripture on any particular occasion, and how far they pronounced what they had read, but there is no question of what they wrote. One last comment here on this. The oldest fragments of the Greek Septuagint do contain the divine name in its Hebrew form. Dr. P. Cale says, "We now know that the Greek Bible text, the Septuagint, as far as it was written by Jews for Jews, did not translate the divine name Kyrios, but the Tetragrammaton, written with Hebrew or Greek letters, was retained in such manuscripts. It was the Christians who replaced the Tetragrammaton by Kyrios when the divine name written in Hebrew letters was not understood anymore. The Kairogenese." So as we see here over and over, facts are showing more and more that the Hebrew translations had God's name in it. They didn't remove the name, it was still there, but when they saw it, they read Lord. Now that's totally different than what the translators of today are doing. If they say they're going to follow Hebrew tradition keeps the name in its written form. But translators today in general aren't doing that. So can they really say they're following Hebrew tradition? No, they can't. What even seems to make this whole thing worse is that there are those that do want to promote God's name. There are those that want to keep His name in His written word, the name that He wants us to get to know. And how many scholars are there that will criticize and say, no, you shouldn't do that? You know, why is it that they have a problem with somebody who does want to keep the original writings with God's name in? It does happen. How unfortunate. So, in conclusion, is money a good reason to take God's name out of the Bible? Not at all. Is King James tradition a good reason to keep God's name out of the Bible? Again, no. Okay, so we might not know exactly how we pronounce God's name, so we should take that name out and use Lord? That's not pronouncing God's name exactly the way it was said either. Jehovah is close as far as a Latinized form of God's name, just as all the rest of the words in the English Bible are used the same. So is saying Jehovah a legitimate reason to remove from the Bible? Not at all. Should we use Yahweh? Okay, that's the case, we could. But then at the same time, why are we still using the other Latinized names? Either way, Yahweh or Jehovah is still closer than Lord. And yes, we can translate various names into other languages. It's done all the time, so why not be able to do it in the Bible? As we have even with the name Jehovah. And as far as following a Jewish custom, well, the Jewish custom was always to keep God's name in the written word. So when even scholars say that we take God's name out of the written word and replace it with Lord, and then we'll say because of Jewish tradition, that isn't the case either. So why not just keep God's name in the written word as He inspired it to be? Okay, so here we've spoken about God's name in the Old Testament, and this is video number 8. Okay, we got 8. The video number 9 of New World Translation Curiosities, we speak about God's name in the New Testament. A lot of research is done there too. So in summary, there really is no legitimate reason to take God's name out of the Bible, out of His Word, as if we can improve what God has done. Let's just keep it there. Okay, so that wraps up another video here. As usual, I'd like to remind everybody to click the subscribe button, and there's a little icon down along the bottom here somewhere that is shaped like a bell. If you click on that one, you'll be notified when new videos or new talks are placed here on this channel. You'll be among the first to know. We do have a lot of talks coming up from the 1973 convention. That was a convention that I just missed by a couple weeks till I started getting involved with Jehovah's Witnesses. Also, leave a comment if you happen to have any home videos or home old movie films or talks from long ago, so we can make arrangements to have them digitized and posted here. I would like to thank everyone for the comments that you post here too. Many of them are in harmony with Philippians 4 verse 8, and those are the ones we especially appreciate. We can upbuild each other because other people will be reading those comments too. So again, thank you for the kindly comments, and that about does it for now. So thanks again for watching, and we hope to catch you again soon. Bye-bye.